she should be back, hopefully by the time that we go into the material. So once again, hello, my name is Bai Bajiga, and once again, it's a great pleasure being here this morning and talking to you about a topic that's very close to my heart. I work across organizations, across geographical locations, and across topics, and I kind of call myself a workplace culture strategist, but at the core of my work, at the core of the messages that I share and how I work with organizations and leaders, diversity, equity, and inclusion specifically are very, very core topics in everything that we do and how we work together. So here, I'm not going to go through the highlights that I've selected here. It's just kind of a bit of an introduction for me. So what I will share is perhaps a fun fact about me. And the fun fact about me is that I am a global nomad, meaning that my address is my suitcase. So I do travel around a lot. I don't have necessarily a specific address. I've got an address where my letters go to. But for the past 3 years, I've lived my life as a digital nomad. Originally, I'm from Latvia. The past 10 years or a decade, I have spent working, living, studying in the UK. I have spent near the majority of my professional life in the UK working for large American corporates on the British soil. And as a digital nomad, as I mentioned, I just came back from Spain, where I spent the last 7 months running away from the European winter. Currently, I'm dialing in from Latvia, and in less than a month, I'm going to be heading to Scandinavia. So as you can see, the travels and the movements, that there is a lot of that. So my life's quite dynamic, but it's a pleasure to be in here with you. So let's dive into the topic. And so one of the key questions that I have come into this session with is, why foster inclusivity and why now? And I'm going to pose that question to all of you and ask you, why are you here today? Why inclusivity is important to you? Perhaps what expectations have you joined today's session with? And if you can just use the chat function I'll give you 30 seconds or so just to type in some things about why inclusion is important to you, why inclusion is important to your organization. What has prompted you to join this session today? And I'll see if I can pop the chat up. Don't be shy. It's just your colleagues. What we talk about here stays here. So why foster inclusivity? What's so important about it? We were told to. Okay. Get you out of bed on Wednesday, 9 a.m. in the morning. But inclusion is more important and prominent than ever before. I agree with you, David. And why? Why is it more important and prominent than ever? I'm curious about that. Not to unwittingly upset other people. Part of that, absolutely. We've got 63 people here. I'm sure people have some other ideas, some other reflections about it. We are working in a multicultural society. This is needed, absolutely, to be able to communicate, to understand each other. Any other brave ones? Who's had their coffee? To promote diversity. I like that because often we see diversity as the input and inclusion as an output, but actually it works the other way around. Inclusion is the input, and while representation matters, inclusion is what drives diversity. Allows people to contribute more, absolutely, to respect each other, to understand each other better. Thank you so much for all the brave ones this morning who had their coffee and who shared their insights. Thank you. So we will address that question and we'll talk a little bit more about that. But in terms of what you can expect from today, so we have obviously our topic, which is road to inclusion, and I have come into this session, as I mentioned, with 3 kind of overarching questions. The first one is, why this topic and why now? what does this work look like and where does it begin? Because in my work, I see a lot that people understand it kind of like broadly what it means and what it looks like, but actually often they don't know where to begin. What's the first step that they can make? And I'll also share some more practical ways of how you can play an active role in fostering inclusion personally and also in your professional careers and also as leaders within your organization. And as mentioned before, please do interact in the chat. Please drop your reflections, your questions, comments in the chat. I'll do my best to kind of like keep up with that. But as I said, I've got some help today. And also, hopefully we should, with the slight delay that we've had this morning, hopefully we still should have some opportunity for the Q&A at the end. And worst comes worst, if we don't, your colleagues have my details. So if there are any burning questions, they will share those with me. I'll be happy to respond to those after the session. So the first thing where I would like for us to begin is to kind of like get on the same page. And usually this is the time when we kind of like go through the definitions of what diversity means and what inclusion means and what equality and what equity and all of these things mean. I'm not going to feed you too much of those definitions. I mean, that's a kind of like Google's first page search thing that we can all do in our own time. But one thing that I do want to take a moment is to reflect on the word, on the term inclusion, as that's kind of like the key topic for us today. I do want to spend a little bit of time looking at that. So first and foremost, inclusion comes from Latin, from includere, from inclusio, and it means to shut in, to lock something in. And as part of that, I want to offer you two inclusion definitions, both from Oxford Languages. And the first one is one that you probably would have heard and seen quite a bit, out there, that's shared quite widely and is in the context of diversity and inclusion, in the context of psychology, of social activism and justice. And that is, inclusion is the practice or policy of providing equal access to opportunities and resources for people who might otherwise be excluded or marginalized. And I'm sure you have all heard this definition. There's kind of like nothing new. It's a pretty sterile inclusion definition as we know it as part of this topic. However, I want to offer you another definition of inclusion from the realm of geology. And it might feel a bit of like a red herring, but bear with me. And in geology, inclusion is defined as a body or particle of distinct composition embedded in a rock or other material. So why I wanted to share these two definitions is just to give you a bit of a comparison to how the same term, potentially meaning a very similar thing, is described in I would say, two very distinct ways. And so in the first one, there, to me, is a power dynamic. Because there is someone who has an agency to be the provider of equal access and opportunities. And then there are people who would otherwise be excluded. So there is someone with the power who's got the power to give that access, to give those opportunities to someone. In the second definition from the realm of geology, where it describes inclusion, there are three specific things that jump out at me. The first thing is this distinct composition. And for me, that recognizes a uniqueness of something. And kind of like in the DEI space, that would be the diversity part. The second thing is that there is no doer. The rock is not the doer. The rock doesn't have the power to include. It is this particle or this body is already assumed to be an integral part of this rock or rock formation. And the third thing is that it talks about a particle. So it kind of like implies that we are a tiny kind of speck of dust kind of part of a complex system, but we are still part of it, and we are still distinct, and we are still important part of that. And so the reason why I wanted to share this with you, because the terms of DEI, EDI, JEDI, DIB, and all of these acronyms that roll off our tongue so easily and so comfortably have become accustomed. However, by using these acronyms, it often takes away the sense of urgency that each of these terms are aiming to call for. So we need to get really, really specific and intentional and alert about how we use our language and how we use our words. And also research suggests that, how we talk about a topic, in this case, diversity or inclusion, has a major impact on our ability to actually achieve our inclusion goals. So when we put our values on the walls and we say inclusion is one of our values, it is very, very important to be very specific about what we mean by that, because inclusion, as we see in this example, can mean two slightly different things, and how it's worded also offers a different perspective of what this word means. And so we've talked about what inclusion means, but I again want to invite you to jump in the chat and let me know, what does inclusion feel like? So how do you know, how can you tell that you're included? What are the feelings, the emotions that you feel when you're included? What are the physical sensations? What are the stories that you're perhaps telling yourself that you know that you're included, that you're really included? How do you know? I'll give you some seconds to think about it, and please pop it in the chat, whatever comes to you, because this is your personal experience. There's no test, there's no right or wrong answer. How do you know that you are included? Katya's saying you're feeling part of the team, feeling respected. Lamar is saying feeling equal. Okay. You're involved, part of the team. I only noticed when I was excluded. Very powerful, Simon, and very, very true. Because we take inclusion for granted, and we only understand the real power of it when we lose it, or when we not necessarily lose it, but when we are actively excluded. Effectively communicated, we are effectively communicated with, we are given the same opportunities as others, we are feeling valued. You're feeling at home, like you belong. Felix is saying, knowing that your opinions and ideas are noted and respected. Very powerful, Ian. Louisa is saying, when I'm able to express myself without worrying. Yep, without worrying of repercussions. Thank you so much for all of those responses and answers, and kind of like reflecting for a moment of what inclusion actually feels like. And so let's return to the first question with which we started, why this topic and why now? Of course, on one hand, we have this, social movement, social justice movement. It's kind of like, or as organizations say, it's the right thing to do. There's, of course, we have to appreciate that organizations are also, unless they are social enterprises or nonprofits, they are for-profit, money-making organisms. And so within this context, organizations want high productivity, high impact teams that drive revenue, that drive innovation, that achieve market share, or whatever other success factors are important to your organization. And organizations take different ways in achieving this. So, for instance, over the past few years, there have been many viral reports from McKinsey & Company, from BCG, from Deloitte, and other predominantly consultancies that have told us that higher organizational diversity leads to higher profits, higher innovation, higher productivity, fill the gap. So organizations have taken that on face value and have gone on a wild shopping or recruitment spree for diverse talent. However, it's important to, again, pay attention to what we are reading, what we are looking at, because when we look closer and when we get past all the beautiful infographics and when we get past the slick presentations and all the headlines, we come to a conclusion that these reports, what they're talking about correlation and not necessarily cause and effect. So just the pure presence of someone in a space, while it's meaningful and valuable, not necessarily will guarantee you straight away higher revenue, higher productivity, higher innovation, and make you the biggest and most profitable company in the world. So it's important to understand that diversity is a potential. And it's relatively easy to create a visibly diverse group, but turning that group of people into a high-performing team who feels safe, who feels like they can perform at the top and the best of their potential, that's the challenging part. In other words, if we look at these items, and I'm sure you all recognize them, and there was a time in history in our lives when we were actually excited to receive a CD player, a radio, or a color TV. However, of course, we live in a world right now where these items are very easily replaced, and today many of those are replaced by a thing such as smartphone. And so inclusive companies are like smartphones. They have managed to combine popular and specific functions into one device where different parts create a superior performance. So the diversity is all about those items on the left, all about those different devices and functions working separately. But inclusion is when they all work together. So what we are talking about integration and not necessarily combination. So that's the first part. So why this topic and why now? Secondly, in terms of where does this work begin? And I want to show you a little video, and I hope you can hear my sound as I...
So if you want to change the world, start off by...
And I want to say you probably have seen this video. So again, it's only a minute long, so just bear with me. I'll bring it from the start.
So if you want to change the world, start off by making your bed. If you make your bed every morning, you will have accomplished the first task of the day. It will give you a small sense of pride, and will encourage you to do another task, and another, and another. And by the end of the day, that one task completed will have turned into many tasks completed. Making your bed will also reinforce the fact that the little things in life matter. If you can't do the little things right, you'll never be able to do the big things right. And if by chance you have a miserable day, you will come home to a bed that is made, that you made. And a made bed gives you encouragement that tomorrow will be better.
And so I know, of course, this video talks about, motivation and those kinds of things, but the point I'm trying to make and trying to illustrate with this video is that in terms of where does this work begin, or rather, where do we begin with this work, is we begin small. We absolutely have those big goals. We must have those, the visions, the missions, and they're all necessary to have. However, we have to be able to break them down into bite-sized everyday tasks. And we do that all the time. We do that all the time with our projects. We do that with our strategies. But somehow to make the world a better place, we want to do that in one day. And when it's not a better place, by the time we go to bed, we are done with it. This work sucks. We can't do it. It can't be accomplished. I'm not good enough. I don't have the skills to do it, and similar reasons. Because when it comes to people, when it comes to culture, when it comes to inclusion and other relatively elusive topics, it is very, very easy for them to get overwhelming. So it is important for us to break them down in small, bite-sized chunks and tasks that we can see. The second thing is also realizing and understanding that this is not a solo enterprise. This is not a solo entrepreneurial task, but it's a collective effort. And everyone must play a role in it, and all must play a role in it together. So we each need to sharpen our own tools. We each need to take responsibility of tuning our own musical instruments, but the playing happens in an orchestra, and it has to be harmonious. And living in a world where self-sufficiency, independence, individualism are the things that we celebrate and reward, we sometimes forget about the collective effort, and especially in big tasks as creating inclusion. And also a quick comment on the first step, on the first point, the small steps, big impact. That's a classic also coaching method where we set big goals, but we also break it down to the smaller steps. So for instance, here we might say, oh, I want to lose 12 kilos within 3 months. And we realize that that's a process. It's going to be a process. And for some people, the first step isn't to jump in the running gear or jumping into the sports gear and running straight to the gym. For some people, the smallest step will be to go online and check where is my closest gym and what are the opening hours. and whether I can integrate that within my day, because that's the first step of also building habits that last. Or, if we say, I want to run a marathon by next summer, again, the first step might not be going to the park and doing a park 5K. It might be going online and buying running shoes. So it's really, really breaking those tasks down to their smallest part. The third thing I want to mention in terms of where do we begin is around courageous conversations, and courageous conversations that lead to courageous actions, that lead to positive impact, they begin with courageous listening. So what I'm talking about here, it is about learning to decenter ourselves, to listen without feeling the need to react, and center ourselves in other people's narratives and other people's stories. Even when their experiences, when their values, when their stories don't necessarily match our experiences. It's just the ability, the courage to stick with it, and having the ability to listen courageously. And so now I'm going to just share, a few more practical examples of how you can foster inclusion. And there are many ways of how you can do it. And this is an ever-evolving, ever-happening and going work, an ongoing work. But for the purpose of today and today's session, I'll share 3 things. And I'll share communication, curiosity, and some examples of accountability. And I just want to say that for me, these 3 I find are absolute cornerstones for this work. As I said, there are many other components, many other things that we can do, but these 3 things I think are absolute cornerstones when it comes to creating psychologically safe, inclusive environments within our families, within our communities, within our places of worship, or within our organizations. And so when it comes to communication, I kind of have split it up in individual and organization, but as you will see, they are fluid, and the things that I'm going to be sharing, they are just as applicable in our individual and personal lives as they are on an organizational level. And so the first thing that I want to talk about is emotional vocabulary. And I just want to take a step back here, because often we talk about, emotional intelligence, and that's another buzzword that within the space of organizations, the space of leadership, we talk about and we use a lot. From my experience, when I walk into a leadership spaces, and everyone is throwing around the buzzword of emotional intelligence, but when you actually go to the team and say, okay, emotional intelligence, of course, is important. How to operationalize it? What are the things that you do every single day that demonstrate your emotional intelligence? And that's when it hits. Same with inclusion. Yeah, we use the word inclusion, but how to operationalize it? What do you do every single day that demonstrates inclusion? And that's where we need to become specific. And again, break those things down, not just use the buzzwords. And so as individuals, as human beings, we experience world emotionally. And hence I want to talk about emotional vocabulary, because it is key for us to create meaningful connections with others, because language is what creates and gives meaning to our experiences, to our feelings, and it helps us make sense of our experiences and our world, and also that of the others. And so in the context of diverse workforce or diversity and inclusion, as much as a company, of course, needs to have the appropriate environment, policy, tools, and practices in place, we as individuals, especially leaders, need to be able to connect with one another. So, because we might not always understand someone else's experience, especially when we talk about things like, for instance, racism, if we haven't experienced it personally, it might be difficult for us to understand what someone is going through and that experience. However, what we can connect with is someone's sense of disconnection, anger, loneliness, disgust. Because those are usually the things that these people are trying to communicate of how that experience made them feel. So while we don't understand the experience beyond kind of rational level, as rational as it can be, we can connect with that person on an emotional level, and hence the emotional vocabulary is really, really important. Because we need to have vocabulary to be able to communicate our needs. We need to be able to communicate our values, our boundaries. We need to be able to articulate how we're feeling and how we are experiencing something. And we often use words that not necessarily are they're just accustomed to use, but they not necessarily are the appropriate words, so for instance, used in that scenario. So, an example is jealous. I'm so jealous of your holiday. But actually, jealous is not the appropriate word to necessarily use in that context because it's got a negative connotation, but we are trying to communicate something positive. So actually, envious is a more appropriate word. And so this is just an example of how we've grown accustomed to the everyday language, but actually that there is an opportunity to evolve that. The second thing that I want to talk about is language. So obviously I talked about emotional vocabulary, but I want to talk about language and in terms of how the language that we use evolves. So for instance, there are on an everyday level, on an organizational level, there are, many buzzwords that we use. But do we, again, going back to the first exercise that we did where we broke down the meaning of inclusion, do we really understand what it means and what does it mean to me? So the evolution of language here also means, how we can reframe the certain phrases that we use. For an example, hi guys, when we enter a room full of women. I think that we're all guilty of the thing that we do, but actually in that context, we could say, hello everybody, hello team, hello folks. There are other things that we can use in that context. Another example would be that we often use master bedroom, master bathroom, master list. So for instance, in the in product development world, there are actual sort of lists of product features that they put is master sheet and slave sheet. They actually, that's a technical term in that space, and I don't have to explain why it isn't appropriate. And there are many organizations who have already evolved that language, calling it main and secondary or primary and secondary. But I'm sure there are still plenty of organizations that still use master and slave language. So these are just some examples of how our language is developing and evolving, and how we also need to stay abreast with that. And then also just want to touch on our communication style as well. And what I mean here, so this here I'm talking about kind of like self-awareness. Do we understand our default states, not just how we present ourselves, but how are we under pressure when stimuli not necessarily reaches our intelligence center as quickly, but we react to things? What are our behaviors and communication styles when we have to react? And how that is received by someone who potentially has a polar opposite communication and behavior style. And so this is so these kinds of things can be assessed, and awareness can be raised through different personality tests. Some are better than others. Personally, I work with one called the Global DISC, because what it does and what I like about it, it looks at both personality and also cultural layer. Because we are not just how we behave; we are how we want to behave, and we are how are we socialized to behave in certain situations. And there always is a gap and a conversation to talk about that as well. So the communication style is very, very important as well. So again, we're talking about self-awareness, which absolutely is part of emotional intelligence. And in organizational level, of course, all of these things are valid as well. And as organizations, we communicate in many different ways. We communicate through our website, we communicate through our products, we communicate through our service teams and customer service teams. And also, in today's world, we adopt a lot of new language and new buzzwords. And so we have to get very, very conscious and pay attention to what they mean to us, as I already mentioned. Within the organization, we communicate, within meetings and when we meet each other. So there again, there's an opportunity to pay attention to who is talking in this meeting and who isn't. There are many organizations who say, we are diverse, company, around our team desk or around our executive table, we have, all of these people, and we are very, very inclusive, because in every meeting we go around the table and we ask every single person, what do you think? What are your thoughts on this? What are your insights? And we make sure that everyone speaks, and so that makes us inclusive. However, on face value, perhaps, but of course, we know that not necessarily everyone's opinion has got the same weight as others. So again, the question would be, whose opinions and ideas, after everyone has spoken, are taken on board? Whose ideas are taken more seriously than those of others? Also, who is interrupted and spoken over when they start making a point? Who doesn't speak at all? And so, and another, great example, as I already, mentioned earlier, is our values. How we paint and put values all over our walls. That is also a way of communication in terms of what's acceptable here and what isn't. But it's all, again, important for us to operationalize those values. So we have a set of values. What are the behaviors that unpin those values? And what are the skills that we need to equip our people with through our L&D department and our training interventions, so that we can help our people to gain those skills, to show those behaviors, so that we can unpin and demonstrate the values that are important to our organization. So it's not just about beautiful paintings on the wall, inclusion is our thing, but about how do we operationalize it. I remember I worked with an organization that had courage as one of their values, quite literally printed on the wall. But actually, when it came to people being courageous and coming forward with things that they spotted that have been, inappropriate, or with, certain things that would improve a product or service, organization unfortunately wasn't as resilient and acceptable of those comments. So again, there's a level of and a gap of, what we punish and what we reward, but also what are the skills that we are lacking here, so that we can be courageous. And actually, fundamentally, what does courage mean to us? Maybe courageous to us absolutely isn't, someone being courageous and opening up about their experiences or something. Maybe it means something completely else. So that's another thing that is very, very important. Another mean of communication, for instance, that I want to share an example is our annual reviews, for instance. And how we review our women versus our men. And there was a study done, I want to say in the UK, where thousands of annual reviews over the years were assessed. And the conclusion was that, for instance, it's more likely for women's annual reviews to contain statements as, you are very likable, team loves you, the customers like working with you, you're a great team player. Whereas for men, it would be, Peter was an integral part of this team. During the product development, he demonstrated the skills of leadership and resilience, and he delivered this product on time, and that way gained, created 20% better customer experience and 15% increased revenue. So we get much more specific and back our statements and our review up with data and insights. So again, that's how we communicate. And we have all of this intelligence within our organizations. We just have to look for it in the right places. And another quick thing that I want to share with you is another piece of research by 3 Circles partners, who did research on, or study rather, on communication. So what they did was gave a task, a problem to solve, and the green peaks account for the result of an individual. So they asked for the task or the problem to be solved individually, and then they brought these intelligent, erudite people together as a team and asked them to solve the problem collectively as a team. And the team scores account for the blue peaks and valleys. And so what they discovered is that due to lack of self-awareness of their own communication style and being unable to recognize that of the others, creates an interaction gap. And this interaction gap leaves nearly 80% of potential on the table. So nearly 79% of potential is lost because of these misunderstandings. And this potential accounts to both our personal leadership potential as well as our team potential. So communication is very, very important. So that's number one, communication. The second thing I want to touch on is curiosity. And so I have a question for you once again. And again, you have to open up your chat. So how many elephants do you see in this picture? Drop it in the chat. How many do you see there? Everyone's confused. Petra's trying different angles. Okay, Felix, say none. Everyone agrees with Felix. Maybe someone did manage to. Okay, so they're more trying to. Louise is trying different angles as well. Okay, let's watch the video. Ines managed to spot 2 elephants, so she's done an extra work. Excellent, thank you. So the point of this video is that what I want to illustrate here is that if I stand on the left-hand side and you are standing on the right, from my perspective, I see a giraffe. From your perspective, you see an elephant. I see a giraffe, and I must be wrong. I must be right. You must be wrong. So during situations where our perspective differs, we have a choice. We can either go in and fight, trying to prove our right and someone else is wrong, and that way protect our ego, or we can get curious. We can get curious about what is that they can see that I can't? What is that they know that I don't? What piece of information do they have that I don't? Because we have, obviously, when we have a choice, when we make a choice to look at the same situation from a number of angles and different perspectives, that allows us to make better decisions. And the thing is that life makes sense equally from both perspectives or from all the perspectives. We just don't know the reason. So this is an invitation to get curious so that we can turn our different perspectives and our differences into synergy. Because one of the single reasons for 80% of our problems within our company and equally in our family is due to inconsistency of values, which cause the misalignment of our perspectives. So it sounds like a cliche, and most of the communication and leadership training programs will teach you how to meet someone in the middle and compromise as part of a conflict resolution or negotiation process. But the challenge with that is that the more often than not, it doesn't work, or it makes things even worse. So, but think about this. Let's illustrate that with the example of this sculpture. So let's assume once again that we both are on different sides of this sculpture. So we have kind of like different scenarios. We can either both start arguing and try to convince the other person that my angle is the right one and yours is wrong. We can both meet in the middle as a way of compromising. But what do we see now? Probably a confusing mess. And then the third option that also is viable is that we can both be on each of our sides. We can both talk about this amazing wire sculpture and how we agree on the fact that this wild animal is stunning without even realizing that we might potentially be talking about 2 wild animals, one about giraffe and the other one about elephant. So there always is an opportunity to get curious about the perspective of the other person. And speaking of curiosity, a colleague of mine wrote a profound and equally disturbing article, I would say, on Forbes called You Are What You Click On, Not What You Post, And what this talks about is, one thing is about what we say, who we are, and who we display out there. But the other thing is what we do when no one's looking. And that potentially is a more descriptive and appropriate description of who we are, what our values are, and what are our behaviors. So that's and at the end of the session, I'll send these slides over, and I'll also send over some reading materials, and I'll include this one as well for those who are interested in reading the full article. And the third thing I want to talk about is accountability. And accountability begins and ends with you. People naturally strive to model themselves after those around them. And I again want to show a quick video to you, and then I'll talk a little bit more about accountability.
To answer that question, we set up a hidden camera experiment to see if this woman would stand up at the sound of this tone, simply because everyone else is. You might be thinking you'd never go along with this. Or would you? After just 3 beats, and without knowing why she's doing it, this woman is now conforming perfectly to the group. But what happens if we take the group away?
Elaine, please.
Okay, now she's alone. The crowd is gone and nobody is watching her except our hidden cameras. What do you think she'll do? She's now conforming to the rules of the group without them even being there. Now, watch what happens when we introduce another outsider who doesn't know the rules.
Have a seat and they'll be out in just a couple minutes. Thanks so much.
Everybody was doing it, so I thought I was supposed to.
Think she'll teach the new guy what to do? We kept the cameras rolling as more unsuspecting patients arrived. And slowly but surely, what began as a random rule for this woman has now become the social norm for everyone in this waiting room. Here to explain what's going on in their brains is Jonah Berg.
So I'll stop it here because simply I wanted to illustrate, and I know that this video is talking about herd mentality or group rules, but what it also talks about is the rules of a culture within our organization and how much we do things, again, without getting curious, without asking questions about why do we things the way that we do them here. It could be whole generations of leaders that have changed within the organization, but there still is residue of certain processes and things that we do just because we've always done. And it's a custom, and we've never even asked the question, is this the most effective, efficient way of doing things? And actually, do we even need to do these things anymore, considering how our organization or our teams have evolved? And so it is all about, what are the things that we are encouraging and allowing? Because again, going back to the video and what I said earlier, is that we model the behaviors that we see. And that's why as part of the inclusion piece, we often say that leaders must model the inclusive behaviors so that their team understands, what's acceptable here and what's not. So yeah, we have to be very, very conscious about what is that we are encouraging within our culture, what is that we are allowing, what are we punishing, and what are we rewarding, and even more so, who are we punishing and who are we rewarding potentially for the same behavior. So we have to be explicit and conscious and intentional about it, because culture left on its own devices grows its own extra heads, extra arms, legs, and just goes walking all over our goals and strategies. And as the famous saying goes, culture eats strategy for breakfast. So this is also so for in terms of modeling, and in terms of kind of like getting explicit about these things. For instance, anger within a workplace, it's just an emotion. It's just an emotion. It's nothing bad, nothing good, nothing bad. It's more about what we do with that anger. So we can say being angry or frustrated about something that has happened is okay. Banging your fist on the table or on company walls or threatening someone is not okay. Or it is okay to be passionate. I love your passion. It is not okay in the heat of the passion to interrupt everyone else who's trying to get their point across. We love commitment, but commitment in this organization doesn't look like working late evenings and weekends. So we can't just put a word out there. We say we love passion, we love commitment, but we have to get explicit about what do we really mean and what behaviors are tolerated, rewarded, and which ones aren't. And when we talk about accountability isn't just about the punishment and reward systems. Accountability shouldn't be demanding, it shouldn't be pushy, it shouldn't be forced. Accountability should actually communicate trust and support and psychological safety, because accountability goes hand in hand with psychological safety. There is no psychological safety without accountability, and there is no accountability without psychological safety. That's very, very important to keep in mind. I know we are very, very quickly approaching to the end of our session, and I just want to kind of like very, very quickly recap of some of the things that we talked about, and in the last couple of minutes, just open up the room in case there are any questions. And so once again, the purpose of the session was for us to get together and talk about why this topic is important and why it's important today. Where do we begin with this work? And we talked about we have to start with the smallest step and break it down. We have to have courageous conversations. Gosh, what is the last thing that the third thing that I talked about? That we have to understand that this is a collective work and this is not a solo enterprise. So we have to do this work together, and everyone has to be involved in this. So diversity and inclusion is not just diversity and inclusion manager's job, it's everybody's job. The finance team, the customer service team, the HR team, the marketing team, everybody's. And also just share some examples of how to play an active role in fostering inclusion through our communication and getting very conscious about our language, through curiosity and exploring the gap rather than fighting over it, and also accountability and how to make it and how to ground it in trust and safety rather than make it about the set of punishment guidelines ultimately. And so as we wrap up the session, I want to leave you with a homework, or rather just a question to ponder on. How do you know, as a leader of a diverse team, or someone who sometime in your lives will be a leader of a diverse team, how do you know that your team feels safe and motivated to collaborate, to innovate at their full potential? So again, going back to the very first question that I asked, how do you know that you feel included and that you feel under your management, under your leadership feels included? So thank you so much, everybody, for making the time this morning of being here, of engaging. I really appreciate you all, and I appreciate your leadership team who invited me to come here and talk to you on this Wednesday morning. And I know that we are just 1 minute away from 10 a.m., but if you have any questions, you're welcome to ask and stay a little bit longer. If you have to run to the next meeting, I appreciate you probably do. You're welcome to send your questions to Katja and Louisa, and I'll be happy to connect with you or answer any specific questions. So thank you so, so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Baba.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yep, thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.